1. We're live.
Driveline R&D podcast, episode 55. This is Alex Caravan, Driveline Baseball Manager of Data Science, and today drinking a guest choice out of Kentucky bourbon whiskey.
Oh boy!
Or Tennessee whiskey. What do we got, Mike?
Oh, Kentucky bourbon. Okay. Yeah.
Lindley.
Lindley, sports engineer, Driveline Baseball, drinking a Duck Rabbit Amber Ale, part of the craft brewery deliveries that Anthony got for us for Christmas.
Let's go.
And
let's go. And I'm Anthony Brady, primary host, Driveline R&D podcast. Wait. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure production's all good, audio and everything looks chilling. But manager of sports science. Yeah, episode 55. How many? See, we're cruising. Is it like the audio and stuff has me so bugged out? I can't even talk right now because I'm so worried that it's just gonna bust down after like all the pain and headaches we went through to get the live setup working. Today I am drinking possibly spiked green tea because I left all the craft beers at Driveline. Unfortunately, so I can't even enjoy them yet right now.
And we got a special guest, Mike Ressler, CTO of Biomechanics. Mike, great to have you on, man. What are you drinking?
Cheers, everyone. I'm drinking Presidente, a massive Presidente. Was surprised I could find it in Pennsylvania after seeing you guys talk about it. So thought I'd look for it. And yeah, 25 ounces of Presidente.
That's
that's considered a tall boy, right? How tall are you?
I mean, tall boys are, That's more than a tall boy, isn't it?
I know, that's what I'm saying.
Like a huge boy, right? Yeah. I'm 6'7". I am a tall guy, so I'll let it roll. But
exactly,
5 ounces is huge.
Yeah, and Mike told us off air that it's actually his third Presidente, so we'll see when it starts to hit him.
Minute 30.
Yeah, but yeah, Mike.
Happy to be on, guys.
Yeah. We've all talked before. You've seen a couple episodes, so this is pretty exciting. Figure most basic question. I know a lot of people in baseball know you as the CTO of Kinetics, but you want to give a kind of quick background on how you got there and what you're doing for?
Yeah. So prior to Kinetics, I had started my own company called StatEasy. It was a sports statistics and video solution. So I was a manager for the women's volleyball team at Carnegie Mellon. I played volleyball. That was my sport, coached it for a while too. Started a company taking statistics and marrying those statistics with video. Started up a whole company around it. Hired, raised money, the whole gig. That exited, and CJ Handren was starting up Kinetics, and I had been consulting with them for a little bit. And he asked me if I knew anybody that would be interested in starting up the tech at Kinetics, and I could not raise my hand high enough and fast enough. So I was very excited to get to work at Kinetics. That was 2014. So it's been a number of years since. Yeah. 2010, I started my company. In 2014, joined Kinetics.
So when did DK start then? What year were they founded?
Kinetics started in 2013. I believe it was like midway through 2013 was when CJ and Buddy Clark, CJ Handren and Buddy Clark, Buddy, a professor at University of Pittsburgh, started it up. And Jeff Schultz, I think, was the first hire. He's our chief commercial officer, and I was the next hire behind him as CTO. Well, I was director of engineering back then.
Kind of a broad question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Lindley.
I was going to say, we probably most of our viewers know DK kind of dabbles in pitching and hitting both. What was the first one for you guys to get going on? Was it hitting or pitching?
It was hitting. So we had our Gen 1 sensors, and I normally have them like at the ready for demos. I don't have one right now, but yeah, it's I have all of the old like 3D printed sensors. And I mean, Buddy Clark, we have like a whole shelf back at the office of the history of it. But yeah, it was all in hitting, and we had some really janky contraptions dating way back. I used to have to like plug a wire into it. It was interesting to say the least. But yeah, the straps have evolved. Gen 1 was pretty interesting. You had physical buttons you had to push, and there was like a thing you actually had to plug in to charge it. So
this is a nerdier question. I don't actually know if any of our viewers are going to be interested in this, but coming from the engineering education, there was this like typical progression of manufacturing from like 3D printing for like prototyping and all that stuff, and then you get into either like injection molding or some other type of mass manufacturing. Are you guys? Do you guys like? Have you changed up your manufacturing process at all? And has that been an interesting progression?
It has. It really has. So we do a lot of prototyping with 3D printing. So it is still a valuable skill. But Jeremy Rittenhouse, our platform engineer, who he has done ever since Gen 1. He did our Gen 2 plastics and electrical and hardware design, and recently our more recent Gen 3 units as well. Plastics, hardware, firmware, the whole thing. And yeah, we have a contract manufacturer here in Pittsburgh that does all of those. South of Pittsburgh, we'll lump it in with Pittsburgh, and they do all of the electronics assembly, and then the plastics come from a couple different places. But and they get assembled here in Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I heard a rumor that you got the very first version 0 drawings of the DK straps next to you on your right. Is that true? your kid.
These are my inspiration. Yeah, good luck on work today. Let's go, Dad. Right. So my kids are cheering me on. This is my wonderful world for my son. These are good talking points. They make me smile every time I look at them.
Great.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Future engineers, right there. I'll tell you what.
Heck yeah, we love to hear that.
Good questions.
Yeah, I guess getting into a little bit of IMU talk. Do you have how would you explain an IMU to an ordinary person kind of just getting in the field? And how would you explain that being the focus DK kind of prioritized from the very get-go?
Interesting. So I would probably say springs and tops. So a spring is basically the accelerometer. So an IMU is an inertial measurement unit. That is the electronics that we use. And it is a MEMS sensor. And basically inside of it are microscopic springs that measure the force that act on the sensor. And that is the accelerometer. So it measures the acceleration. And for those of you paid attention in physics, F equals ma, right? Anytime you have an acceleration, you're also, if you know the mass, you're measuring the force then as well. But it's able to measure that acceleration. And then tops, I say tops because it's a gyroscope. Everyone understands the spinning top. Really, what that gyroscope measures is that angular velocity, that spin. So if we have both the forces that are acting on the object and then the gyroscope, the spin, I can tell its orientation in space, and then I can tell how much it's moved. And if I combine the two, I get a really good read on exactly where it is and where it's facing and where it's sort of oriented. With that information, even though it's just on this tiny little sensor, right, it can go into the handle end of a bat, and sort of like magic. And you guys know all the science and physics that go into it, but it is like magic every single time that I see that happen. But yeah, it reads all of that so precisely just from the handle end of the bat, and then turns that into the beautiful 3D pictures that we know and use all the time.
Yeah, I think
so that is my.
I think I got crossed up in school when we got to IMUs and force transducers and everything. I mean, that was a really good description. But I think the thing that honestly clicked the most for me when understanding gyroscopes and whatnot was just oh yeah, you think about when you turn your phone from portrait mode, to landscape kind of a thing. Just when you hear IMU stands for inertial measurement unit, I think it can be a lot scarier than just oh yeah, it's just this thing that tells us position, rotation in space, and it's in tons of just normal items that you use every day. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's in your phone, right? So for a while, way back in the beginning, we aren't doing it now, but we thought about having something where you could strap your phone, because we just wanted people to get a sense of it without necessarily needing to buy the hardware.
Yeah.
But they're not the IMUs inside of phones are not the same spec that ours have. And as it turns out, we had to ruggedize it a ton. So we don't want to encourage people swinging their phones around and making contact. But yeah, same concepts lives inside of a phone.
Yeah, I was going to ask in terms of like IMU development. I mean, and Lindley, you might know some of this as well, but have there been any like large, I guess like breakthroughs or updates to the technology that have kind of like changed the way? Or is it mostly just over time they're getting smaller?
They're getting smaller, they're getting lower cost, they're getting to where they can sample higher rates of change of angular velocity, so I can sample more degrees per second before it saturates, and I can sample higher forces before it saturates. And then putting it all on one chip and then coupling that chip with a Bluetooth unit and doing all these other things that just make it more useful for then downstream hardware developers like Biomechanics to do. And a lot of those chip manufacturers are pushing that forward. There's a ton of really interesting sensing and sensors coming out that I think will be very interesting to see how they get applied in sports. DK is keeping an eye on them, obviously. But couple cool things. I'm hoping to see new innovation all around.
Yeah. What about I'm a little removed from the sensor space, a little bit more than I was in school. But what about the operating range? Because in school I learned how like if you have a device that you want to measure a bunch of different movements, or a movement that includes really fast movement and really slow movement. Yeah. You want to have sensors that kind of accurately measure both ends of that spectrum, because if you have something that measures really fast movement, it might not be as sensitive to really slow movement.
Right.
If you have something that's accurate with the slow movement, it's probably not going to be able to measure. It's going to get saturated and measure the fast movement. Is that one of the specifications that's improving, or is it mostly around that upper end of?
So there's a couple things you can do. Sometimes that is just how many bits you use to encode the sensing range. So if I use 8 bits to encode a force, well then I have 0 to 2 to the 8th, and that's what I can sense, and how I compress that in. So if I have a 200G scale and I can only sample at certain intervals, so increasing the number of bits used gives me better fidelity. So I have more increments that I can use. Some of that, then you have different noise thresholds where, if you're going to sense at that range, maybe you've got bigger noise. There's a lot of filtering techniques to handle getting rid of that noise and getting down to the signal. Diamond Kinetics, we actually do have a low range, 16G or 32G and a 200G accelerometer, so we can get both the fine precision movements when you're nice and still, and then the really fast and obviously the impact, which sends things through the roof, right? So that will always saturate on anything except for some piezoelectric accelerometers.
It's really, really interesting. I noticed when you gave us that demo, when we showed the spot where the sensor goes in the bat, you were using one of the bats. I think you guys call them smart bats. Yeah. Is there an advantage to using those over the external sensor? Because in gym we typically use, I think we have some smart bats laying around, but we typically use the one that basically straps onto the end of the knob. Is there a difference between using the two?
There's not that much different. There's the simplicity, right? Like there's less for me to worry about here. My kids all have the Marucci smart bats, so they're using them. It's just easier. It's cooler. And we actually do get more data, right? So if you consider if it's just strapped to the end, a lot of the vibrational information is attenuated. And if it's inside the bat, we really can read a lot of vibrational. Now, we're not doing a lot with that today, but we hope to in the future. So we're looking at feasibility studies around what we could do with vibrational impact analysis, quality of contact, those sorts of things, but nothing presently. So possibly could be in the future, but just the simplicity thing for right now.
How do you approach sampling rate? Like, how do you approach making a decision on what sampling rate to use for an IMU, either specifically for DK's purposes or just broadly as a whole from an engineering point of view?
So that's a really, really good question. Some of the ways that we're doing it, or we have done it, and the way we look at doing it is we can look at the power spectral density of the motion. We can see what frequencies have the most energy. And that informs us as to where the cutoff frequency would be, where if we're going to stop sampling higher than a particular frequency, we need to know that particular information. But the way that we do it generally, right, is the sensor and the clock can sample at some rate, and we can, let's say they sample at 1,000 hertz, we can drop every other, and then we get down to 500 hertz. And there's a way to smooth that out. You don't want to just drop every other, but there's a whole branch of math and a whole branch of math around like how you do that and do that correctly, so you don't alias signal.
It's really mind blowing thinking about all the things you could do with just a sensor. Like for a long time, I had no idea you can sense gravity. Like by the way that the sensor actually like measures forces and acceleration. Technically, gravity is an acceleration, or it's a force, or you can measure an acceleration because it's from force. So just like that idea and using that to like figure out, which is like one of the main components in figuring out what orientation the sensor's in. But it's just mind blowing, the things like the math that goes behind it.
It is. It's pretty wild. And like, so hopefully everyone had calculus. I know you guys definitely did, but it's all just an integration, right? Like if we know the acceleration and we know the velocities and we're trying to get to position, we just have to integrate to get to position, which comes with a couple questions, right? Like we have a couple unknowns around like the exact starting position. We use player height. We use a bunch of studies that we've done to determine what we expect a starting height is, but not everyone's hands start in the same location. So you can fool any sensor if you change the general starting height of your hands and you start real low and then swing high, like it's going to look like it's above your head. If you start high and then just drop and then swing low, it's going to look like this giant J, because there has to be some assumptions around that.
Yeah, that's what I was curious to ask you next, like a little bit. And I don't know how many of our viewers will have kept up with the sensor conversation on the technicalities, but from a practical point of view, what are some of the things that you feel you might not have known coming in, but you learned through trial and error with DK? Like what are, like you mentioned one of them, the difficulty in, maybe correctly labeling the start of the swing. What are some other ones that you feel like after a couple of years working on it, you have a much better idea, or you've kind of like worked solutions around?
The one, let's see. The one that struck me, the one that has been interesting, is just exactly the waggle that some players have prior to the swing. I know you guys are familiar with how we've worked on that over time, but there's a lot that is surprising on just how much waggle there is or can be, and how when you need to sense that gravity very precisely, that can be very, very challenging. So there's methods and ways to do that using the sensor data over time. Sometimes you need a longer buffer, or what do you do on the sensor versus what do you do on the phone or mobile device that's connected. And those are some interesting things that we've been playing with recently around how we can work through some of that waggle and that real starting position, the starting position assumptions. That's probably been the most, I would say, most surprising.
Yeah, I feel like troubleshooting wise, you just like never know what's going to be a problem until it's actually a problem, and so you have to wait till you like encounter those to realize like, oh, that's going to be an issue.
Well, testing is a huge thing that we do. So, I mean, we don't put anything out there without testing it very thoroughly, right? We do our own, and we've had to, maybe one of the other things that's most surprising is just how much we do around validation of our own data prior to releasing. But then, to your point, Anthony, like when you just get out there and you see the data that people are sending back, like, oh man, I would have never thought that they would have done it that way. Or like one of the things that we've seen recently with our new mounts, you can actually put the sensor in upside down. People do that. Like, oh, of course they would, right? Like, but we just didn't test for it. And there's so many interesting things like that just come back and you go, oh man, like we have done so much around testing. We've done like a whole big computer vision workup around how do we, like when we put out the spin axis of the ball, and we say, hey, the spin axis is this and the spin efficiency is that. How do we know, right? We compare it to a bunch of other data sources. What do we do when we don't agree with that other data source, right? Like, there's a lot that we have to do to unpack that. Okay, immediately we assume we're wrong. How did we do? Like, okay, all right, check this, check that. All right, if it's still checking out, what do? We turn to high-speed video, right? Same thing you guys use for a lot of your analysis. So we start unpacking that and then but then we need to do it in bulk. So that ends up being a pretty interesting challenge that we've had, is just how much testing we build out around putting products like this out.
Yeah. Even from like a software or like research analytics point of view, like when we started releasing our own tools and reports out to third parties, we'd already done a bunch of testing internally. But yeah, once you just get any combination of data or third parties trying to use it in interesting ways, you can never predict like what's going to be an issue. I've had so many comments back and forth of like Jeremy Tectile, our track customer facing representative who will like DM me a bug, and I'll just look at it and I'll be like, this isn't a bug, but I should get an error message or something because this person is really misusing the tool, but that's not a bug.
So Anthony, so you started to, and this is what got me chatting in on your last podcast, 54, just around like, you change one small thing in an experiment, you change the location of some sensor on a body or some marker, and even just like repeatability, without the exact same assumptions or the exact same coordinate sets or all these like so definitional work that is just the tedious work too, right? It's not the glamorous, sexy stuff. It's the, okay, well, what was your axis? Okay, which is X, which is Y? Okay, what units were you using?
What kind of Euler rotation? Like all that.
Exactly. Yeah. And then what sample rate did you use? Like we were talking about, even approach angle. Like, interesting. If you filter it at 240 frames per second versus we're sampling it at 3000, okay, that's going to look like this. Oh, okay, that's why. Right. Just all these interesting particulars of it. How do you guys approach that? I'm interested as a viewer and as an outsider to Driveline. Like, you have an interesting problem set there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I was actually going to bring this up too because it's pretty, like, even in terms of going into testing, I think that's honestly a good place to start with it. Is like, what do you test against? Like, what's kind of like the gold standard, establishing that, like, why is it the gold standard? Like, how do we even know that that's accurate, kind of a thing? And moving from there, I'll say that, like, as far as what we do internally, the best practice is just like rigorously document everything that you do. And really, it's one of the biggest failures of research publications, where you don't get like the full scope of the methodology and you're only limited to the abstract. Because if you don't know within the methods how they're procedurally going through data processing and analysis, it's really tough to know, like, results and discussion wise, what's actually going on. There's just like so many immediate follow-up questions that I have when I read a paper. It's like, okay, you guys said you saw this, kinematic velocity or whatever. Well, I mean, first of all, how are you measuring that? What's like the marker set, the model, filtering? All of those questions immediately come up. And it's
like a whole Q&A section.
Yeah, it's a disservice to not have like a standards guide where we can just say we followed, this protocol so that everyone's on the same page. It's
sample at this rate, filter this way. Even like, which filtering method are you going to use? A sliding window. Okay, well, how big is your sliding window to average that? Oh no, you're not going to do a sliding window because it introduces this phase delay. Okay, interesting. What are you using? I'm using this. Just wild stuff.
It's so tough too, especially in baseball, when like a lot of people in the space don't have a background in like academia, research, science, etc. So like they're told you can go and read papers, you can just go read like peer-reviewed papers and like gain information, and then they read one paper, it says one thing, they read another paper, it says another thing, completely different like methodologies, process, like ways of going about processing, and then you have to like tell them, you're like, well, there's a lot of nuances and limitations with both of these. Like, you got to go deeper than just looking at the results, sentence in the abstract. It's definitely tough.
So was that a surprising part of your guys' job? right? So, knowing your backgrounds and where you guys came from, and you've been living in the driveline world for so long, like is the communication to coaches the trickiest aspect or the most surprising out of your job? Or are there other things that have, caught you by surprise from what you thought it would be to where it is now?
I say that the communication with coaches wise, it's very frustrating on their end, and you can like immediately see how frustrating it gets because they'll come to you, you'll like have a conversation, you'll explain like, well, not quite, here's why, here's some things. And it can just be like very disheartening to like people that are trying, which is why it's super frustrating within this technology space, how it's become like saturated with companies that like don't test, don't have robust like validity, testing and whatnot. And just seeing them put stuff out, sell it to these coaches who are like really adamant about trying to be data-driven, cutting edge. And then they get this piece of technology that doesn't measure what it's supposed to measure. And they're like, oh, well, like I'm trying here, but
it can be an indictment against the entire industry too.
It's such a bummer. Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
That was one of the biggest areas of growth for me, I think, in the first. I'm still trying to get better at it as well, but just choosing what to even bring up at all, choosing and then how to word that, how simple to make it. Should you say like an optical motion capture lab or system, or should you say a biomechanics lab? So like there's a spot for all of the details, and I think it's really hard to try to figure out when to leave those out, when to introduce them, because you're running the risk of just losing whoever your audience is.
Yeah,
if it's coaches.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was just going to say sometimes the three of you guys probably struggle with this too, or not struggle, but get faced with it. If you go too detailed almost to a kind of casual consumer, they'll just like disengage and like almost assume like whatever you're saying doesn't make any sense just because, it's like one thing to write it out, like put it out in a paper. And actually one of my first big projects when I started working at Driveline was putting out some of our initial peer-reviewed papers. Like I had one on kettlebell, on EMG activation, holding a kettlebell carry. And I knew very little about EMG. I did some research on the statistical analyses, a portion of it. And I dropped I think I had a 4th order Butterworth filter, 10 Hertz for the low end cutoff, 450 for the high end cutoff, like all these details. And I was like learning them as I was putting the paper together. And obviously like the majority of people just wanted to know like what seemed to activate more neuromuscular activation. And then I had one guy, shout out Andrew Vygotsky, who has a number of papers out, who just emailed me. It was like, why'd you do a 4th order Butterworth instead of 5th order? And I was like, I just read up another paper. I was like, I'd love to have this conversation, but but the fact that I even put it out there, at least allowed him to ask the question and have a short conversation. Where obviously no coaches are going to care what order Butterworth filter I used.
No, for sure. Yeah, we just hired somebody just a couple weeks ago, another PhD out of Pitt, and who is just going through all these primary sources, just picking apart questions like that. Well, why? And then going through our code base too. Okay, why third here? And why'd you use a 3rd order Butterworth? Yeah. Oh, okay, filt. Okay, I see you're doing for phase delay, but why didn't you just do it this way? Okay, man, I don't know. That's great, actually. And then obviously I don't know, but Dr. Min Zhang, our lead R&D scientist, does, and they get into it, and it's just so fun to listen to.
Yeah,
that's super valuable.
I was going to say that Caravan's point brought up something that I thought of quite a bit now too, especially at Driveline. I mean, it happens internally more so. It happens with blog writing or going into a study. It's really weird that we'll work on peer-reviewed studies for the sake of science and research, but the majority of our readers will be baseball people, right? And so especially in blogs, even in on Twitter and whatnot, you kind of have to balance communicating to them, but also be ready to get heat checked by the expert.
Yeah.
Right. So it's one of
this level.
Yeah.
And this level.
Yep. Yeah. So you're writing for that. I mean, I thought about it too at ABCA or maybe past winter meetings. I feel like Caravan probably went through something similar, but you're in a room with these people, you're talking to like the coaches, coordinators, and you're giving some very topical surface level stuff. And then like an analyst pops in with like a super direct, like what type of model are you using? That type of thing. It's like, okay, we're going to have to completely turn this conversation and these people are going to check out kind of a thing.
Yeah. You want to pause. So I was saying, I think, so as a vendor or as somebody, playing in this space, you're doing all the hard work of aggregating all of that, right? You Driveline. I choose my coordinate systems for like sensor convenience, not for like an analysis convenience. Mm-hmm. You're choosing it for analytical convenience and how it's going to relate to the end user. So we vendors should probably all be playing in your space. And I would welcome a Driveline, hey, sample at this hertz. At least coordinate systems and, where you sample along the bat. And when we talk about, and I know blast and diamond kinetics are completely different there in terms of where we sample on the bat and a couple other concepts and metrics. I'm very happy to understand better and like have that at least put out there so I can play in that standard or not. I think that would help you and it would help a lot of other coaches too in terms of like appreciating and ingesting all that data.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think it definitely, so on that end, we mentioned it before, but like I think the biggest application and it's so important on the biomechanics end, and it's getting even more and more important with like the more popularization, but just things like a quick guide that says like, this is 0 degrees of elbow flexion and this is 90, that's what we're going to go with.
270 or negative 90.
Yeah, or negative 90, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, like... those type of things are going to be huge, I think.
Mm-hmm. If you guys haven't checked it out yet on Plus, we have a biomechanics mini course that defines, our most popular kinematics and kinetics and defines those things. But yeah, isn't that what Abs is hoping to do in the long term as well? Yeah,
it's one of the first things that was brought up. I really hope we do push towards some initiatives like that. I think Driveline, we're kind of in a unique spot with already working with a lot of players, like have a good idea in terms of that communication. Because the way that goes poorly is if someone puts out like a standard that like no one else is following, like coaches aren't going to change the definition of something just because some entity comes in and is like, no, that's 90 degrees, or whatever.
Listen, man, I don't like spin efficiency, but like it's here to stay, I think, at this point.
Exactly. There are so many.
I'm not going to fight it.
Yeah, that happens all the time too. Like scap retraction is a great example. I can't tell you how many tweets a year or two ago I put out that used the term scap retraction to describe shoulder horizontal abduction, which has nothing, like very little to do with the scapula protracting and retracting. And, biomechanists or other sports scientists would come in and be like, how can you tell if the scapula is actually retracting? Do you have that in your model? And it's like, well, every single person in the baseball world calls this scap retraction. So, and that's what I'm trying to communicate to, So it's going to be tough.
You almost need like this definition, like this is what biomechanics would say. This is what a physicist would say. This is what baseball coaches would say.
We could have 3 versions of a blog or a tweet thread, one for each target audience.
Yeah, right.
That would be such
it's like a...
You toggle on and off.
Imagine that as like a Driveline baseball, like Google Chrome plugin, Like
awesome.
You can just filter.
Translate this.
Yeah.
This page is in coach speak. Yeah. Translate it to nerd.
The reason I'm kind of like skeptical of that ever happening anytime soon, and you already brought up your one of the trigger points that we've talked about, Mike.
Yeah.
But yeah, like even across pitch tracking technology, Rapsodo and TrackMan have opposite like pitcher catcher view on the X locations. And by the way, I don't know if you know this, but Tom Tango even slid into my DMs a couple months ago.
Man, he has feelings on that.
Yeah, asking me. I think I made a comment about active spin versus spin efficiency, and he DM'd me asking something about like, he asked me what I thought the term should be. And I said, definitely not active spin. I forget what I said.
Oh, I think that's the wrong answer for Tom.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was pushing for spin efficiency because that was, for better or for worse, that seems like it was the first term pushed out there. And it's a term where like the first main pitch tracking technology that put it out there, like Rapsodo at least popularized it, was using that. So that makes sense. And then he had some odd answer about saying just they didn't like spin efficiency. So it's kind of stuck if MLB, I mean, at least in that context, if MLB itself is like putting active spin on their leaderboards, while like the consumers using the products are not referring to as that.
Then it's
kind of a face off. Honestly, kind of a standoff.
Yeah, I know it's tricky and tough, and I don't I don't envy coaches that are coming into that for the very first time. As much as industry players can, like I'll try to standardize on terms. I'll try to get it into a language, right? Like we have metrics, like we have extra metrics behind the metrics, right? We have all this instantaneous data. I can present this data in a number of different ways. How do you want it to come up? It's kind of interesting.
Those are also tough questions to ask if you're a coach, like simple definitions. It's like, you don't want to feel like you're like behind the loop or wrong or like you don't know enough. It's like, what's spin efficiency? It's like, I imagine there's a lot of people that are uncomfortable actually asking somebody that and getting a good answer for that.
Percent of active spin, bro. That's what's
percentage of spin that would contribute to break. Or the percentage of spin in a
I get it. After getting a little bit more into the pitching metrics and measurements, what are you most excited about between the Pitchtracker and the Swingtracker?
Oh man, it's like choosing your favorite kid. It's tough.
I would say that was my next question.
Yeah, right.
Favorite drawing on the wall.
Who's got the nicest handwriting? No. So there's a lot of data behind both Pitchtracker and Swingtracker. I think there's more to be done on top of Pitchtracker data presently that I'm very excited about. There's a lot for Swingtracker and looking at things in aggregate, like our swing fingerprint in particular. We can look at that and then see how that would line up with how does your swing fingerprint line up and help you with your approach to the plate, with your training, with how you might line up against a particular pitcher. The Pitchtracker itself, we have all of the motion because we're an IMU. We have all of that motion prior to release. So from set all the way through release, and there's more to be done there for tells, for this great arms race between pitchers and hitters. That I'm happy to be the arms dealer on both sides for both pitchers and hitters. But Pitchtracker, I think in particular, has just a lot to do. I think it can be in service of a number of R&D organizations and academia then as well, right? Like I want to open up our data set a little bit more so that people can do cool, new and novel work on top of that, right? We've done some work with Barton Smith, who's been on your show before, around his seam shifted wake. And I'm happy to say that I wanted to help immediately. I think what he's doing is really cool. There's a lot of really interesting things that we found about the ball that I'm interested in picking at. Just weird data sets and things I wasn't expecting, and asymmetric forces that shouldn't be there. Seam shifted wake, I think, is one of them. So there's a lot there to pick at, and ball flight, for as simple as it is and as solved as I thought it was when I started with Pitchtracker a couple of years ago to where I'm at now with, well, there's actually a lot of nuance here, and this is a really simplified model. And man, if somebody like Barton could come around and like, okay, now we can account for the seams. Like, there's a lot that we can do there. Now, what is that going to contribute to the actual movement of the ball? I mean, let's look at what Barton's publishing on seam shifted wake. I think there's a lot there. I think there's strikes to be had and there's wins to be had around chasing that. So I do get excited about what can come from Pitchtracker. I think there are surprisingly more people need to be paying attention to that in particular.
Oh yeah,
that's very interesting. Do you think there are exciting integrations that you'd like to push for off the bat too? Like if there are things where, for example, we don't report on like hand or arm path as much as we could. We described some arm positions and we call them arm action metrics. But are there things where you can combine your, for example, pre-pitch hand movement or ball movement with another technology, or what do you think is most exciting there?
So I know Harold Mazingo is looking into ground forces. There's a couple other people, a bunch of people are looking into ground forces, but marrying up different distinct data sets is going to be where a lot of new research comes and where a lot of new gains come, I think, right? Because we've been looking at this stuff for some time now. How do we match that up? So, we've been pushing to make it very easy via our API to integrate Biomechanics tech with other companies so that you can see and play, right? So that's where Track would come in. You can start to see all that and put it together. Whether it's ground forces or exactly what the fingers are doing at release and marrying that up with Edgertronics and all of these other interesting things you can do in both Swingtracker and Pitchtracker. There's a lot in whether we're marrying with other technologies or it's DK trying to push forward into new areas and new avenues. There's a lot to be done there. The one, I'll do a quick little shout out because we're launching. I don't know if you guys have seen the Win VR and Win Reality.
I've seen a little bit.
Yeah, I've seen a couple videos, but I haven't seen it demoed or anything.
So we're going to see a click on I'm ready, and he takes a swing. There's a swing. It goes so fast. So,
oh wow,
right. So you can actually see it in VR. Now it looks pretty cool here, right? And he sort of skips through, but to see this in an immersive thing is wild. So I'm very excited about what Win and DK are doing here. And there's a bunch of these, man, that's awesome, right? But if you look at the Oculus Quest, right, and the controllers, so I've got, it's not on here now, but that strap, the controllers can't sample or are not sampling fast enough. They're sampling optically, and we are sampling with those IMUs. So we can combine those two, the optical and the IMU, and then come out with something like that, and then really see the swing and then feel it around you. It's just wild. So, it's still in a beta, but there's a lot coming out around that.
Wait, so just a follow up on that. So is the application so you have VR and DK linked, so someone can take a swing, see their bat swing path, and also get a bat speed reading?
Bat speed reading, right? They have all of our metrics, right? So we share that via our API, as you guys know, and there's a lot that they can do. Obviously, they have all of the positional information because we're sharing that with them enough to draw that 3D, and they you don't see it there. That's in the calibration section right now. We're working on getting that fully released, but you'll be able to see that glowing barrel speed on your bat, and it looks really cool, and you can see where the ball would have gone. So it's really great, and that's been fun for me living in Pittsburgh. It was pretty cold winter, but my kids have been taking swings, and that's really neat. They're taking swings in my garage or in my bedroom sometimes. Yeah, so they haven't hit anything. That's why it's a wiffle ball bat. But
that's awesome. So cool. That's the swing fingerprint's exciting to me because I feel like there's a lot of things, even in pitching, but hitting especially, because we were using such a long extended object. As far as knowing where the bat head is probably so tough for a lot of people, especially less trained hitters. So being able to be in that VR space and take a swing and then see okay, that felt like this, and this is where the bat head was at the beginning of my swing when I was coming into the hitting zone, is something that I think is could really, really improve things like swing design sessions and people trying to overhaul their swing. Yeah.
Speaking of different bat heads, I was curious, how would you say you approach different size bats and different weights of bats as well when it comes to representing some standard metrics? Because that's one thing that I think, whether naively or not, some people may wonder about how certain technologies like metrics extrapolate to youth populations or using different size bats, things like that.
Yeah, so that's interesting. The couple things that we do that would extrapolate down to youth or smaller bats or into overload or underload. Yeah. we say that the sweet spot of the barrel of the bat is 80% of the length. From a couple studies, it seems to be largely hold. We were trying to do that based on vibrational analysis of a couple different bats. Does it scale? We think so. There hasn't been a whole lot of study on that I know of around youth, but around more like 33, 30, around anywhere between 33 inches and 30 inches is where a lot of the study's been, and on wood. But I mean, Alan Nathan is an advisor of ours and was comfortable with us saying 80%. Dr. Buddy Clark, was the one who started on that. And then, our overload and underload, the MOI, the moment of inertia of the bat, like how hard it is to rotate, changes drastically with overload and underload. We can feel it when it's in our hands as players. But what that translates to in terms of a number, a metric, is that MOI, that mass moment of inertia. And when we do know it from the bat manufacturer, especially for overload and underload, we put that in, and that will change the metrics drastically. So make sure you put in the right length and weight, your little plug, right? Put in the right length and weight of the bat, especially if you're using one of those overload or underloads.
That actually, that reminds me of something I thought about quite a while ago, which is actually going to come up pretty soon because we've had a few open technology validation papers that we're finally getting back into.
We're finally publishing. We hit you about almost a year ago.
yeah. So hopefully be actually like writing those and getting those out. But one of the things when I was going through processing all that data was, first, as we talked about, going around and asking a bunch of people like, hey, how do you calculate this? And where are these calculations taken from? And I thought the bat speed location one was always an interesting one. Obviously Blast doing the 6 inches, you guys do the 80%. One thing I thought of through that, because I had conversations with Dan when we were looking at the validations about, does that make sense compared to the motion capture lab? And then looking at like Nathan's, the I don't even remember what that coefficient is, but the coefficient for like how it comes off the bat and
coefficient of restitution
efficiency.
Yeah, I think it's that, because it's pairing like the bat speed and the exit velocity, like what that ratio can kind of be. But the more I was thinking of it and looking at the data, like as you adjust that landmark location where you choose to calculate bat speed, the speed of the object changes, which should also change the exit velocity.
Right.
If that's standardized, is it possible that you have like a person two people with the same bat speed, one person makes all of their contact 3 inches down the bat further? Those are different, like measured same bat speed in the instance, but different actual speed at contact. And is there any way to I don't even know if there's a way to solve that problem, but how significant could those like effects be, I guess?
I don't think I have a good feel for exactly how significant. I know that it will translate into plus or minus tens of feet in terms of travel distance. I'm pretty comfortable saying something like that. We think we could potentially measure it. There's something there. That's where the vibrational piece would be very interesting. Exactly where you measure it does have an effect. And whether you're trying to, also if you're just trying to pump somebody up, you're like, hey, measure it right at the tip of the bat. And like, oh man, that's a great number. But it's less. It is not as, is not what actually contributed. So, and the interesting thing is like, okay, you go towards the tip of the bat and the number goes up. You come towards the hands and the number goes down. But where are you going to maximize your travel distance, and at what angle are you going to maximize? It's what everyone's chasing, right? Yeah. Can we measure it? Can we help inform that? Yes, in some cases, and like the coefficient of restitution, and like we can try as hitters and we can try as coaches to like teach to hit, but like at the end of the day, like, this crazy ball screaming at you. You got to make contact with wood. It's just a great game.
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun to watch too.
So I guess, along those lines, like one thing, we're putting some finishing touches on, like building out a more robust hitting motion capture assessment using the biomechanics lab. And one thing I've thought of, because we have the ability to calculate bat speed at the 80% distance on the bat, but a more, I guess, like, it just seems to make more sense to use a rotational, like an angular velocity, as opposed to like a bat speed.
The linear.
Yeah. Just because you eliminate that, right? Like where you kind of like make contact on the bat, the 6 inches problem, or the 80% distance problem.
Yeah, so this gets back to, so I'll draw an analogous back to Pitchtracker, right? So one of the things that we thought about doing, so right now everyone talks about break in terms of like number of inches, horizontal and vertical break. Well, if you just pitch slower, you get bigger break numbers.
Right.
So if you pitch faster, those numbers tighten up. But if you spin the ball more, obviously, right? So what you're really controlling is the force, but we don't talk about the force acting on the ball. I like that. It is a much better way to talk about it, but we just don't. I don't know. We talk about it in terms of, and we get questions on that all the time. Okay, obviously the ball is wrong and the calculations are wrong. You just told me my son has like a 30-inch break. Okay, your son's pitching a little bit slower, but and that's a tough thing. You have to have that conversation. But then similar thing, right? We're talking about the linear rate of the sweet spot of the barrel of the bat, because that is what directly correlates to that exit velocity then too. I definitely there is, when we deal with a lot of MLB teams, right? They might be thinking about, hey man, we really got to work on rotational velocity.
Yeah.
Cool. Right. Biomechanics is happy to help on things like that. We have all that information, and I could present it that way if that's the way that Driveline teaches.
Right.
If that's the way that some other organization teaches. All of this information, all of this positional. How do we talk about it? How do we put it into things that we can understand as humans? How do we into things that we can communicate as coaches to other people? And how do we coach and think about it, right? If this matters, is there signal there? That's where you guys would come in and be like, cool, yeah, if we think about it in terms of rotational and we do it, is this statistically significant for exit velocity? Let's pull this back, right?
Yeah.
Is that maybe a better measure to go with? Those are all fun. I love it.
By the way, Mike, I don't know if you've read it or seen it, but there's a really good white paper that came out pretty recently from Glenn Healy called "Analyzing the Side Force on a Baseball Using Hawkeye Measurements." And I think co-author is Laquan Wang. I think they're both professors at UCI. I can link it in the description of this video.
Yeah.
They're both. I think they're presenting on it at Sabre this year, so that'll be like in 3 days. But I think he tries parsing out like the lift and side force on a baseball, especially like with like Hawkeye measurements there to give a better difference between inferred and observed spin axis, which is a whole nother can of worms we could spin a podcast on.
Well, I mean, then we can talk about like, is that a constant force, right? You're assuming it's a constant. Once you get to that aggregated data, was it constant? Does it change?
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, I was going to say that's a really interesting conversation and very relevant to, baseball research right now. So I thought I'd give it a shout out and potential drop.
Yeah, go to Sabre. Everyone go to Sabre.
Oh yeah. The thing I was going to say as a funny side note is I may have told the story in the podcast before, but early on, a coach actually reached out to me from listening to the podcast, and I had referenced some kind of makeshift equation to convert bat speed to exit velocity. Nothing extremely precise, but it's a rough back of the napkin calculation since they have the high correlation usually. And obviously I was basing that off of mostly paired blast and hit tracks data. Yep. So we're talking bat speeds between like 50 and 75, maybe up to 80. And, like for all intents and purposes, you can just imagine like the equation could be like 1.2 times bat speed plus some constant. Yep. And he emails me and he goes, like I coach some youth kids, might need some help on kind of like we're a low budget. We don't really have anything besides like some sensors, but the bat speed exit velocity equation, I think I'm doing it wrong because I'm getting our 14-year-olds are like supposedly hitting the ball 180 miles an hour. Oh. And I was like, oh, that's weird. Like shoot me over the workbook or shoot me over like whatever you're doing, figuring like it might be like a typo in there. and he shoots it over, and he has these 14-year-olds swinging like 105 miles an hour. And I was like, what sensor is this? And he goes, Garmin. And I was like,
oh, yeah. I think I heard. Yeah. Jeez. I'm not here to trash other companies, but that's not real.
But anyways,
and, a lot of that can happen, right? You get like a loose sensor, something weird happens, you'll get an outlier too, right? So
I think they measure from the end too.
Yeah,
it's kind of like
that's what I was going to say. Like, I didn't do much research. I was just like, oh yeah, clearly the equation is going to be a little bit different based on where you measure it. And then I also forget like some other company, some other third-party vendor that I met ABCA in 2020 was showing me their bat speed tracker, and it only tracked bat speed. You kind of like set it up a couple feet away from you, and you just have the swing like in front of it, and it would track it. And they were just they were talking about how it tracks at the end of the bat, and saying like, yeah, go ahead, take these products, like validate them, whatever. But I just remember thinking, I was like, man, even if this was like 100% accurate, how are we going to tell everyone they're swinging 105 miles an hour when they've spent years in gym training and have an idea of their bat speed between like at 65? Yeah. How are we going to tell them, hey man, you swing the bat 107, great job. Like, let's change.
Yeah.
But anyways, wanted to share that. Speaking of like standardization of where to measure bat speed on a bat.
Yeah.
Did you want to get into some of the questions you had on the biomech side of things for us, or just overall? Yeah, go ahead. Some of the questions you kind of jotted down before the podcast.
Yeah, we actually touched on a couple of them. So I'm interested in how you guys are approaching the data sync, because I know you're building out amazing biomech labs presently, I think. So, and Anthony, you and I were joking last time we were chatting, just like there's a bunch of logistical challenges around synchronizing all of that. What helps? Like, hey, as a vendor, a captive audience here, what helps? How do you do that sync across all of those? Because one will miss and like others will pick it up. And
so there's I'm sure Caravan has some stuff too, like more on the technical side, but obviously like, timestamps in the metadata, but having the ability to log in real time and immediately adjust data points, I think would honestly help so much. Like one of the things right now with hit tracks is not being able to log a swing and a miss kind of a thing, So like if you don't make contact, you don't put the ball in play.
It's not there.
So just like
empty.
Yeah, like minor problems like that, just to be able to denote immediately in real time something that happened that maybe doesn't matter for your piece of technology, but is relevant to what other technologies could be recording. Right. Exactly. Yeah. I think that would be, big. I'm sure Caravan has some more like technical, actual pairings, maybe standardizations there.
Yeah, I was going to volunteer. I mean, one of the things we do, and by the way, Mike, I think we might have mentioned this, but we've really spent like quite a bit of time in the last year, like on just standardizing everything, like versioning pipelines, versioning databases. So like a pretty big project, honestly, for all three of us was putting together all our biomech pipelines into like a structured SQL database that updates constantly, we pull like general population cohort averages, all this stuff, just linking everything up, because in the past we had like so many like floating parts to it that it was a lot trickier, I think, than we expected going in. I know Lindley and I went back and forth on a bunch of bugs multiple times, but like one of the things we do, we have like point of interest data points that we have in one certain table, and then we also have like our full signal table. And right now we have 300 frames.
Point of interest is like point in the swing or the event. Or
like foot plant,
single time,
knee height,
single point in
contact,
time,
etc. Yeah.
Versus the entire the full time series data set.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. And we log the full time data series as well in a separate table. It increasingly becomes more and more of a huge data set and something
massive.
Like I should probably revisit at some point from a processing speed point of view.
But I have thoughts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm down. I'm down to chat about that for sure. But right now we do like 300 frame. 300 frames for the full signal. So even that is something that I think going forward. I don't know what you guys think, but like when it comes to comparing full signal data, it like the more you have to, extrapolate certain points and then have to like cross check when you measure foot plant, when you measure ball release, when you measure lead knee height, like what events do you sync up to have those 300 frames in between. All that stuff is probably super pivotal. And when
we were synchronizing our data sets, we thought like, oh man, impact, that'll be easy, right? Ball there, ball gone. Right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, and even something that seems as simple, like when I first started Driveline, I heard ball release. We have all these metrics about positions at ball release, and it's just like, okay, well, we're not actually measuring anything about ball release, and the standard is like basically an offset of a position. So it's just like there's a bunch of those that I'm actually finding right now. I'm comparing two different measurements of data that are both in time series format, and what I've found, and I've done in the past, and it just basically synchronizing by peaks and troughs is something that's super like, it seems to be robust and easy enough, like good balance there to compare data sets, which I don't know if that's what you were getting at, Caravan, but like you don't have to worry about the events and how they're defined if you just compare the whole signal to one another. So
I meant making that clear, like in between like a third party data set or something.
Yeah, I mean that's how we do some of the alignment with win reality there. The peaks and the troughs there, we call that, it's a cross correlation.
Honestly, you know what would be the most helpful is I know that there's like an open source software out there called LSL, lab streaming layer. I think it like originally came out from UCSD, and they're like some biolab that they have, but basically the goal was to be able to like real time synchronize data streams from like multiple technologies like motion capture lab, EEG headset, gaze tracking, IMUs, EMGs, all of that. And so right now it sources like every technology that you can think of. And if you release like a new EEG headset, you basically, if you want it to get purchased, you need to integrate it with this lab streaming layer and make sure that it kind of works. I mean, if there was like an open source platform, because I think what it does is, first of all, you synchronize all of the technologies to this, and then it sends out like data points and returns them, and it automatically adjusts for the offset in signal from those like pieces of technology. Yeah, and so it automatically aligns them, and then you can like start a session for your like research protocol,
everything,
which is huge for them because especially with like EEG data, you need like very synchronized data points, and more they're doing like experiments and research using multiple technologies at once, trying to just get more data. So I think it's pretty far-fetched to imagine that on the baseball end, but the more that companies, I guess, could start to like, build their stuff with that in mind, the ability to potentially like, okay, tap into their data stream in real time, and I can pull this one in. I don't even know what that looks like, but I know that that's how they've started to solve that in like other research fields.
That's pretty wild. Yeah, we should talk about that some more. I like that. Cool. So yeah, the couple other questions I had for you guys were around like, so people just getting started out. I know you're doing a lot of hiring, and you've been public about it, which is great, and I love seeing that. Yep. And sort of for the people that are just getting started, like what are the publicly available data sets that are out there that are worth other people's time to get into, right? Like I'm interested in putting something out for as Diamond Kinetics. I'm sure I know you guys already have a bunch out there, but if you were to recommend to somebody else who's getting started, what publicly available data sets, or how would they get started in biomechanics?
Yeah, I know on the biomechanics end, C-Motion has a really great free educational like tutorial that you can go through with Visual 3D that can give you some insights into like signal processing, kinematics. I think all of the example files are with Gate specifically. Actually, this is honestly the best like resource for like research methods in biomechanics, and this is actually like directly with if you get this, it comes with like a copy of Visual 3D educational.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of like resources and walkthroughs here to like learn kinematics. So it's not like that expensive. But I definitely like, I refer back to this like all the time.
Awesome.
I can help pay for it. If you need a hand, just DM me. I'll Venmo for half of it.
There you go.
That's such a good one. Yeah. Request Venmo from Alex. On the baseball end though, it's not as great. Obviously, I mean, we put out C3D files with all of our publications, which you can get. But I'd definitely like to do more of that kind of a thing.
It's also still tough though. There's a lot of like to get comfortable with like the C3Ds are unprocessed data. So it would have to be processed in a program like MATLAB or Visual 3D or something. So I think there's definitely room to improve there. And I know that I've talked to Joe and Anthony about it, getting a bigger table type data set out there for maybe that's more like entry level for somebody to jump in and start just like comparing.
It'd be great for hiring, right? Like you put something out there, somebody does some research on top, like let's hire that person. They're in.
Yeah. Crowdsource the research.
Yeah. And hopefully you guys do a lot of really good puns or jokes generally on walkthroughs of gate analysis.
Ooh,
There's a lot there.
Oh, I've definitely, I've seen my fair share of those. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
But also someone who's been criticized for their own gate, right, Brady?
Okay. I mean, I have great gate patterns. I won't accept that kind of slander.
He does have a nice squat. He was showing me his pistol squat this weekend. Yeah. Unbelievable.
If any listeners who haven't seen Brady in person, but does I forgot the verb modify. Yeah, the Kentucky whiskey got me. If anybody does see Brady who that hasn't previously seen him, check out his gait, because I often say he looks like occasionally looks like a penguin. And I'd like some verification of that metaphor.
It's intentionally deceptive. You know, you have to appear unathletic, and then you just turn it on. You turn it on,
and then you just turn around and rip
a dope, man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah,
like you think he doesn't walk efficiently, and then he'll go drive 400 feet with his on the disc golf course.
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, public resource stuff, though, I really do wish there's more. I think early on, especially in the like last, a year or two ago, that was the most common like question I got was like, hey, I'd like to learn more about baseball biomechanics and pitching biomechanics. And I'd be like, yeah, me too, honestly.
Working on it. Yeah.
There's like, and they'd be like, is there any like book out there? I was like, it's really tough. I think biomechanics is especially tough because it's like it's a field underneath like a couple other fields, So honestly, like if you don't have like physics, math,
working
and then
knowledge,
also like anatomy and physiology, like you're gonna have a pretty tough time, like going straight into biomechanics. So I usually tell people, like general exercise science is a good place to start. Anatomy is super important. I think like if you're trying to understand movements without an understanding of like joints and musculature, all that, it's going to be pretty tough. And then going further, just like basic physics and math, because that's all it is. Like you need to understand how angles are calculated and in what like planes of motion they're happening in and what you're moving in. So the hard answer for everyone is that there really isn't a like biomechanics for dummies that doesn't at least start with like, okay, let's make sure you have fundamental anat and phys knowledge, math and physics, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, I'm hoping. I mean, we have CMU and Pitt right here in Pittsburgh, and I'm hoping to do more with their sports analytics clubs. They both have very well-known sports analytics clubs and amazing professors there on statistics and biomechanics, and just want to get something going with them, whether it's white papers or cleaning up a data set and getting that published for people to do interesting work, right? Like it will help all of us all across.
Especially right now. Too. Especially right now, like with the limited access to like in-person labs, I know that so many people are running into those issues.
Data share.
We've talked about that a bunch internally. We haven't moved as quickly as probably we should have, but doing exactly that, right? Like creating a data set, scrubbing it of any just like anonymize it and be like, hey, here's what we've got. Like play around with it, kind of a thing.
I'll say one other thing. It's a tough line because it's almost, some of it is we're making new data sets that we haven't like previously explored ourselves a lot of the time. So we're like almost like that's the natural like path. Like we want to get the insights first, or like see how useful it is, then push it a little bit more public open source. But we're getting to a point where it's I think it's like even unrealistic to expect us to get to all the interesting questions with our own data. And I've had people email me, or other people email other R&D people, and I've sent them a couple smaller data sets. But yeah, I mean, even just after this conversation, I'm pretty motivated to see if I can put something up on like a GitHub repo. Have to get some permission from our CEO probably, but I don't know. I think there's a fine balance in there for sure, and definitely a good opportunity.
Believe me, as a commercial entity, I completely understand, not wanting to give away competitive secrets. But at the same point, it's just good for baseball and it's good for analytics. And like, if somebody does something awesome on top of your data set, again, like let's hire that person, whoever that is. Exactly. Like, sort of bidding war. Driveline versus DK.
Split deal. We're going to get a Driveline DK split deal employee.
There you go. Like 50-50. There we go. For sure.
Mike, to kind of finish it off, I was going to say, I know, I guess I recently just found out you're actually better at volleyball than biking. But I do want to hear the biking story that you told Anthony, or just your best biking story. Since
all right, the best one is definitely is definitely when I started getting into biking. I think the thing that really sealed it for me is on an MS 150. It's a multiple sclerosis, 150-mile bike ride split over 2 days. Good fundraiser from Pittsburgh to Erie, and they're all over the place. Look one up if you have one near you. It's great. I loved it. And I think the thing that really got me was, in Pittsburgh, a lot of hills in Pittsburgh. And on my first ride out to Ohio, where it transitioned to being flat finally and not just hills all over the place, I found out like the joy of what a Peloton is and like how you can just sit and like draft on somebody. And then the one time when I was riding with my brother-in-law, and like I just got in the zone and really had a great time. I was really cruising, was feeling real good, put my head down and just went. And I looked behind me, like I finally finished up like 10 minutes later after really pulling. I like peeled off the front and I was like, oh, wow. I got a couple people, and I keep going back, and it was a lot of people, each one being like, hey, big guy, thanks. Yeah, thanks for the ride. Hey, thanks. I'm like, holy, that's a lot of people. Like, oh, okay, thanks everyone. Holy, yeah. So that was really a blast. And just getting that, just traveling and seeing sights and staying active. That was good. Really want to get back to biking some more.
I don't know if I ever told you but before I did my walk from San Diego to SF, I was actually planning with my friend, we were going to do like a loop of Oregon on bikes. And then we scrapped that because of the Oregon fires.
Oh man. Yeah.
And instead you walked across California.
Yeah. I remember when I had that meeting with you guys, Mike, and I told you this before the meeting, maybe not as much detail because it was it's kind of a little bit close, but we started walking. I forget what city we started walking in, just some random like city right above LA. And I took that meeting in Camarillo. And that morning when we started walking at like 6 a.m. or whatever, and I think we had our meeting at like 11 a.m. We hadn't fully realized we were walking like, I think it was over like Moore Lake or something. And there was no Starbucks for 18 miles We taking a bunch of calls on the on the walk and stuff. Just got to be careful with the muting yourself when cars go by, whatever. Like I was at least like a dab hand at being a pretty engaged person on a call, but I'm pretty sure there's gonna be screen shares on this call. Kind of disrespectful if I can't sit in front of a laptop for this important meeting. And my friend had a couple calls, and I was feeling pretty good, so I'm like, you know what, man? There's like 3 hours till this meeting. We got 18 miles. I have a 35-pound backpack on my back, but I think I can make it but I have to leave right now. And he's like, okay. And I just started like running off, and I made it. I emailed you like right before saying I'll be like just 2 or 5 minutes late. I made it probably 3 minutes before 11 to that Starbucks, but I was just soaked in sweat and so thirsty, so I knew I had to get water before I could possibly hop on the meeting. So I'm like, just running a little bit late. I'll be there in 2 minutes. Going to Starbucks, get myself the biggest glass of water, biggest cup of coffee, and then we had our meeting. And I
didn't notice anything.
Yeah, you're like, where are you right now? And I was so confused where I was. I thought about it for like 5 seconds. Yeah. If you remember, I'm like,
I do. I was like,
Camarillo. I'm in Camarillo.
That's awesome. Yeah, I didn't realize that. Man, you weren't huffing and puffing at all. Well done.
Yeah, I just needed 4 minutes to collect myself.
Cruise through the meeting. Nice. Well, thanks, you guys. I really appreciate this. Yeah. It was a good conversation. I like being able to ask you guys a lot of questions too. I know we worked.
Yeah, this is super fun. This is one of your episodes for sure.
No, this is great. It's super educational too. I think honestly the description on IMUs alone, I'm gonna refer people to that conversation a bunch.
Nice.
Very valuable. Thank you.
And thanks for participating in the chat last week or a couple weeks ago? Keep that up. We love that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you're right. Out there. That was great, man. I was getting all fired up. True story. I was playing my son in ping pong, holding the phone up on one ear, and I'm just trying to keep up with him. And he's in first grade. That's this one, and he was smoking me. So now
let's go.
I'm horrible at it, but yeah,
that's awesome.
It was fun. It's like, wait 1 sec. Type out a thing.
That's great. Blessed. Yeah. Nice. Well, sweet. Thanks for coming on again.
Yeah, you guys.
That's awesome.
Right. Take care.
We will see you all next week. Peace out.
Peace.